section of the PhD program, whether it be coursework where you're choosing an assignment, a topic that you want for an assignment, or whether it's candidacy when you're choosing a topic for that paper, or whether it is your research proposal dissertation, which of course is the big choice that you need to consider. So what I want to do for this session is a couple of things. I want to first present sort of a kind of a process that I think is good for coming up with a topic and discussing that. And then I want to open it up to Alicia and Jackie and Will and other faculty that are here for any input they might have. And then I also just want to open it up for questions and answers and also discussion from those of you students who have been through this already and have gone through some of the selection of the topics. I did want to take just a moment here. I noticed that David asked a question, and I want to honor the questions as we go along here. And he asked, did the program change from CFGS to School of Business and Public Leadership? And the short answer to that, David, is no. The PhD program has always been under the School of Business and Public Leadership. And that is the school within Johnson University from which we are a part of, or part of that team. CFGS, Center for Global Studies, was the initial organization and consortium that Alicia put together as the founder with other universities to collaborate and to come up with the idea for the program. And so that's sort of the distinction there. Does that make sense? Okay. If you have any other questions about that, we'd be happy to answer those as well. That's the short version of that. So John, if you could allow me to, am I able to share a screen at this point? Okay. Let me share a document here. Okay, can everybody see this okay? Okay. So when it comes to choosing a topic, there are several steps that you really want to go through to make sure that you're choosing a topic that is effective and appropriate for what you're going through. And so again, I just want to walk through this briefly and share it. And then if there are any questions or comments along the way, we can certainly stop and discuss that. As I mentioned, there are several assignments within the coursework of the PhD program where you have an opportunity to choose a focus. And so this could apply there. Again, candidacy and then also research proposal. But the number one thing, the first thing you want to do, and as you can see, it's kind of a flow chart here, is to choose an area of research. Now, the first question is, do you care about this area of research? For shorter papers like assignments and candidacy and that sort of thing, candidacy, it's definitely important. But for others, it's not quite as important. But when it gets to your research proposal, your dissertation stage, that is really where you really want to make sure you're choosing an area that you care about. As I had a discussion yesterday, one of our breakout groups, that topic, that area of research, you're going to be working with that for around 2 years. And so you want to make sure it's a topic that you care about, that is important to you, and that's something that you can stick with. When it comes to candidacy, I will mention specifically there, it's important to choose a topic because that's an opportunity for you to sort of vet your area of research. We've had students, like for me, for example, when I chose my topic for my candidacy paper, it actually became part of my dissertation later because it was associated with that area and I knew that's what I wanted to study moving forward. We've also had students, when they choose a topic, they think they care about it, and then they do a candidacy paper on that topic, and it's not nearly as exciting or they're not nearly as passionate about that topic as what they thought initially. And both of those things are a win, whether you decide, yes, I really want to study this based on what I did in the candidacy paper, or no, I do not want to do this based on the work on the candidacy paper. So let me, okay. So you've got this area of research. You got to care about that area first. That's important. Second criteria then is this area connected to leadership? Is it something, we're not talking about biophysics, we're not talking about astrology, we're talking about leadership. So how is it connected to leadership? Make sure you can articulate that. and is it connected to leadership? Now, the good news is that leadership is a very, very broad topic. There are very few areas in which we cannot connect topics to leadership. That's the good news. That can also be the bad news too. When something is so broad in potential, it's often difficult to narrow something down specifically. And so, but make sure, first of all, that it's connected to leadership. And then, as you can see, as the flow chart works, if the answer is no, go back and start over to that other area. And then the question is, there ample literature surrounding this area? Now, this specifically goes into the candidacy paper, for example. For the candidacy paper, you want to choose a topic that has enough research surrounding that topic that you're able to draw from that literature to compose your paper. Now, when it comes to research proposal and your dissertation topic, gaps in the literature are good because that means there's areas for you to add to the literature. But make sure that you have something that has ample literature surrounding this area. That's important as you, and honestly, frankly, that's important because of simplicity and accomplishing your task. You want to make it, and this is going to sound weird coming from me, the director, to say, you want to make it as easy as possible on yourself in some of these steps. And so making sure there's ample literature surrounding the topic is an important part of that. So once you've done that, once you've identified the area of research, then you need to narrow the scope of research. And the first question is, do you have a clear unit of analysis? So do you know what it is, the unit you want to study? Unit of analysis can be, I want to study the way things work in a certain congregation, or the church at large, or the world. And obviously you want to have a clear and manageable, and I'll get to that in a second, scope of research. So clear unit of analysis for the purposes of the paper. So again, what's the context that you're going to study? What is that context? What is the unit that you're focused on? Many times we get to purpose statements in papers that it's very broad. I want to study the area of leadership in churches, for example. That's too broad. Churches where is that going to be? What unit is it going to focus on? Is it going to be a certain demographic? Is it going to be a certain denomination, and so on and so forth? So make sure whatever that is, that it is clear. And then the second thing of that, is it manageable for the purposes of, it says candidacy here, but it can also apply to your dissertation or other assignments as well. Manageability is a very important aspect of the things that the topics that we choose. You want to, as Dr. Crumpton so aptly shared with me early on in my process, is you only need one dissertation. And sometimes we choose areas that are not manageable, that would require multiple works to actually accomplish. So for example, for candidacy, you don't want to choose a scope or a unit of analysis that is so broad that you're never going to be able to cover it in the 25 to 35 page paper. You want to pick something that is manageable for you to do, bite size for you to handle. When it comes to research proposal, your dissertation topic, you want to choose an area that's manageable for your purposes of completing the dissertation. Another mantra you'll hear in this program is a good dissertation is a done dissertation. And so you can always do more postdoc work later, but make sure that what you're choosing is manageable for your project, for your research, so that you're not doing a research study or a dissertation that takes 5 years. You want to get it done as soon as you can as well. And then the next question is this focus important to the academic conversation? Again, rarely is that answer a no. I mean, there may be some instances where there's a no, but you need to know not just is it important to the academic conversation, but why? Why is this important? In fact, when you write your research proposal, you'll need to put in there what the need for research is. What is the significance of the study? Why is it important to the academic conversation? So as you're narrowing the scope, think unit of analysis, think manageability, and then think focus and how it will contribute. I will say in regards to candidacy, and we're going to talk more about that in the next session, but in regards to candidacy, you need to know what you're adding to the body of literature as well. What is it that you're actually adding to the body of literature? You're not just reporting on something, but you're adding. So we need to, you need to have an idea of what that is. And that will be why it's important to the academic conversation. And then we get down to the write a purpose statement. I would say you need to get in the habit of writing a clear purpose statement every time you write something. I don't care whether it's a 500-word reflection or a short assignment. Think about your purpose. What's the purpose of why I'm doing this? And make sure you can articulate very clearly. When it comes to writing, one of the things I've noticed is that if you don't have a clear purpose statement, it's very difficult for the reader at times to know what you're writing about and understand what you're getting into. And so I've had candidacy papers that I reviewed where there's not a clear purpose statement, and I'll be halfway through the paper before I actually realize what the discussion is about, what the argument is that's going to be made. If you've been in one of my classes, you've probably heard me say in a paper that good academic writing is sort of metaphorically taking the reader by the hand and walking them through your discussion. And I think that's important to think about. It starts with a good purpose statement. So your reader can say, okay, I know what they're doing. I know why they're doing it. I know what to look for in the paper. So here are the elements of a good purpose statement. Does your purpose statement have a verb? In other words, what do you want to do? What do you want to, are you going to explore something? Are you going to connect something? Are you going to evaluate something? What is that verb? What is it that you're going to do? Then the next part of that is, does your purpose statement have a noun? What do you want to study? I'm going to explore what? What is that noun? What's that focus? Again, this is a part of your unit of analysis. What is that one thing you want to study? Or it could be even for a dissertation, I want to explore the experience of, or I want to examine the prevalence of, or whatever the case may be there. But make sure you have that verb and you have a clear noun about what you want to study. And then, does your purpose statement have a population in a location? And this is where that narrowing your unit of analysis is important. What's your context, in other words? So I want to explore the spiritual formation experience of those who have gone through a missional formation experience. That was my purpose statement, a variation of that for my own research. So what do you want to do? What do you want to study? And then what's the population in a location? And then the last thing there, the last issue there is, does this purpose add to the body of literature? And again, when it comes to candidacy specifically and dissertation, your work needs to add to the body of literature. You're making a new connection, you're making a new observation, you're making a new revelation to the literature, and that's vital. That's what a PhD is all about. That's what a PhD is all about, is adding into that scholarship, that body of literature. So once you've done all those things, once you have identified your area of research, you've narrowed the scope of the research, and then you have a purpose statement, then it's simply time to start researching and writing. And I'm going to stop sharing here so I can see some of the comments here. Okay, access to the slides. All right. So that was a lot to take in right there. I wanted to go through that entire document there and give you an opportunity to see that. Alicia or Will or Wilbur or whoever else is here would like to chime in. What else would you add to that?
I think the main thing is the purpose, because the purpose becomes your, excuse me, becomes your roadmap for where am I going. I even, when I'm writing, I print it out on a piece of paper, big letters, and tape it to the wall so that I can kind of orient myself as I go. Because, you know, rabbit trails are what they are. Any of us who like to do research, we can kind of go off on a tangent. But the purpose helps orient us, and it helps to, as researchers and writers, and it helps us to also be clear on what we're even trying to do. What are we trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I would. Yep. The reality of that too is that as you're working, particularly on your bigger project like a research proposal, when you're doing a literature review, you're going to be very tempted, I think, as you study, to chase rabbits, right? You come across something that's interesting and you're like, oh, I may need to include that. One of the hardest things I believe in writing a literature review for a research proposal and a dissertation is narrowing that scope and focusing clearly on your topic. And so as Alicia mentioned, if you're able to go back to your purpose statement and say, okay, you know what, this is really interesting. I'm going to make a note of that. I'm going to do an annotated bibliography of this. I'm going to set it aside because it's related to my work, but it is not the crux of my work. And that's the key to doing that as well. That's a good point. Sorry, Wilbur, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Oh, no, it's good. It's good. You covered the two things that I'm most interested in this whole process. And one is you've got to be passionate about your topic. It's depressing to talk to somebody working on a dissertation that is living with this topic for months and months, and they have no interest in it. They have no passion around it. The whole process goes so much easier and faster when you just can't wait to get up in the morning and dig into the research on this topic. You know, it makes all the difference. And the second thing, which you also covered, is making it manageable. My chair, when I was working on my dissertation, I told him what I wanted to do. And his first comment was, if you want to make that your life's work after you graduate, go for it. But our purpose here is to prove that you can do research so that you can graduate. And so let's narrow that scope. Let's get it manageable. And so those are the two things that always come to my mind when I'm thinking about that, which you covered.
Yeah, Jim Estep always said to me when I was going through the program that this is not to be your magnum opus. This dissertation is not to be your grand life's work. It is the purpose to get you through this degree so then you can continue to work. And the collection of your work will be what you can point to. Wilbur, let me ask you this. Is there anything specifically in regards to quantitative research that you might say in this process might look a little different than a qualitative study as far as choosing a topic?
Yeah, you know, I'm in the minority here. I love the numbers. I love the quantitative aspect. I love being able to, we were talking in one of our breakout rooms yesterday, the black and white of it's either statistically significant or it's not. So qualitative has a lot of gray areas. So for those of us that like the really clear, you want the answer, quantitative is the way to go. I think part of it depends on the topic of what you're looking at and who your audience is, the participants that you want to include. And so some of them more naturally will fit with a larger audience where you can get 300 or 400 participants maybe to join with you in a survey, something like that. Others just don't lend themselves to that kind of, you know, you may be wanting to talk to a handful of people to do a qualitative study. So I think a lot of it depends on the topic and what kind of an audience you would have available for participants to join with you in the research.
And that is an issue for qualitative research as well, as far as feasibility of actually carrying out your research. I know I've had conversations with students in the last week or so talking about, okay, how do I actually study this? If I want to explore this, who am I going to be able to find that will be able to give me the information that I need? You know, I can come up with a study that I want to explore the way things work in leadership for CEOs of the top 5 market value companies in the United States. How are you going to actually secure interviews with the CEOs of those companies, though? That's probably not quite likely. Or, you know, I want to study leadership in billionaires. You know, if you can get all the billionaires to be a part of your study, then that's awesome. But also consider what you can actually accomplish in that as well. So I think that's a great point, Wilbur.
I did cough, but you notice I turned my head and covered, just to be sure nobody was contaminated. Bearing in mind the admonition that nobody knows you're ignorant until you open your mouth, I take that risk right now with this august assembly of people here. We got some bright people on this call. It's always a privilege to be a part of this group. The one point I would ask you to consider is bear in mind everything that's been said. Download the slide that Dr. Beard has created. That is such a succinct presentation of all the key points. Hold in both hands what he has said and others and what Wilbur has brought forth about quantitative work. And I would ask you to consider that when you make your argument, you've written your purpose statement, you know where you're going. Make your argument on the paper, not just in your head. When you only argue in your head and write the conclusion, we don't know how you got there. As much as you have to make a contribution to the body of knowledge, as Dr. Reed has said, you have to prove that you can do research. And one of the ways that you prove that, maybe a key way, is that in writing, you express those arguments. You reveal critical thinking. You reveal an ability to reason, an ability to conceptualize what you've read, hold it, process it, and then make it your argument. That would be my contribution for right now anyway.
Yes, I think as we review papers and look through what we see, the struggle oftentimes is that clarity and understanding why behind it, and then the clarity of argument and discussion. I think there's a lot of, oftentimes there's some oversimplification and leaps of points, like if A then B equals C, then but there's not a lot of in-between material. So as Will says there, make sure you focus on the depth of that discussion and articulating that clearly. That's really an important part of it. And David, I want to address what you said there. David said that you should avoid controversial subjects for your dissertation. I would not necessarily say you should avoid controversial subjects. I would say that, in fact, if you are in a PhD program and you're trying to add to the body of literature, good luck avoiding a controversial subject, because everything you think there is black and white evidence or a stance on, there you'll see that there's someone else that has the opposite view. And so everything that you do will be controversial to a certain extent. And so I would say find something you're passionate about, but be, as long as, I guess maybe the caveat that I would give is not to avoid controversial subjects. Just don't try to preach in a paper. That's the key. Oftentimes I think that idea of controversial subjects is that I have an opinion and I want to prove my opinion. And let me tell you, one of the things that will get you, will delay your process, particularly in research proposal dissertation stage, is if there is overt bias present, your committee is going to hammer you. And you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to remove that, and you're going to have to go back and continue. And the thing is, I will tell you, bias is one of the easiest things to determine in a research paper, I believe. I can see it from a mile away. And so the truth of the matter is, when it comes to qualitative research, as you go through and study methodology, you're going to realize that bias is implicit to your work in qualitative research, particularly those elements that you're passionate about. When I went into my research about spiritual formation and adult learning theory, I had some preconceived notions about that, but I was able to frame that. I was able to mitigate that, and I was able to write in such a way that it was not, here am I proving what I already believe. So I think that's the key to controversial topics, is making sure that you're not just setting out to grind an axe. That's probably the best way. Don't do that in a research paper. That will get you in a lot of trouble. But I would say don't avoid necessarily controversial topics. One of our students now that's in the research proposal phase that I'm really looking forward to is Aaron Montz, and he's a friend of mine as well, so I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying his name. But he's working on race issues, and it's a very controversial topic that he's tackling. But it's also a very important paper. And my vision as a director, and I know this has been Alicia's vision as well, is that we are covering important topics and groundbreaking topics. So I don't know, I don't want to contradict whoever you spoke to directly, but I would say please do choose controversial topics and just do a good job with it.
I think your point about keeping an open mind and being intellectually curious is important. I read one proposal and said, there's really no sense for doing the research because I already know what your conclusion is. So you've got to have an intellectual curiosity of when you go into it.
I might add as well, when it gets to the research proposal, it's really making a clear and concise argument as to the relationship to leadership, whatever track it may be in. I think that's one of the biggest or the most complicated or the most difficult area that I see in researching it, is that we have, a lot of some different theories and whatnot, but connecting it back to advancing the, the discussion on leadership. And as you mentioned, Chris, it's, vast, and there's, oh gosh, thousands and thousands of publication on leadership. But one of the things that some of the empirical research is kind of lacking, really, and that's always been the argument at the ILA conference, is providing substantive, research on the field of leadership itself. So even if it's under one of the, tracks that someone is specializing in, whether it's education, leadership, whatever it is, make that strong connection back to leadership. That's one of the areas that I have to really kind of stretch sometime to see what is that correlation in research back to that, if we're truly trying to advance the field of leadership itself. Especially, like I mentioned, at the ILA conference, where they're constantly looking for some good, solid research to extend the conversation. And we do have an opportunity to have a voice from a Christian perspective as well, as we pursue that particular area.
Yes, and again, that comes back to the idea of making the connections for the reader, so they don't have to, try to figure all that out, the mysterious connections that you're trying to make. The more overt you can make those things, the better off you are, typically speaking. Now, you want to allow the reader to draw their own conclusions, certainly, but you want to lead them to those conclusions. So to say, here's how I got to where I got to, here's what I think. So I think that's important. To answer Kim's question, as far as verbs and resources that align specific verbs with the particular research designs, I can't think of anything right off the top of my head that would be a resource for that, but I do think that that's part of the discussion. So for example, when it comes to qualitative, the words like explore are important, and really there's a lot of differences between quantitative and qualitative in the verbiage you would use. Alicia, could you add some insight to that?
Well, I put a couple of references that sort of trigger to different ways to structure the research purpose, depending on what you're trying to do. And Kim, I think it's a great question, because I've thought that somebody needs to write this, because there is a sort of research preference, if you will. So for example, if you say the purpose of this research is to explore the lived experiences, that triggers me to think about narrative inquiry or I can't even say it today, phenomenology. And so one of the ways that I try to find it, especially if I'm embarking on a new study and I'm not quite sure, is I go into the ProQuest dissertation database and I Google the methodology, and I kind of peruse a few to see how they structured their research purpose statement as a way of sort of learning how that methodology has been applied and to what kinds of studies. Does that make sense? But to your point, I think that that's something that could be written, because we have enough knowledge about, just because there's been so many dissertations written, that we could probably chunk it if somebody wanted to take that on between midnight and 6 a.m.
Well, and I would add to that, I think that's a great point. And one element in choosing a topic, particularly when you get to your dissertation and research proposal, that specific topic you're going to focus on during that process, it is absolutely vital that you look through dissertations. You look through other dissertations that are related to that topic for a couple reasons. One, it will help get into your head some of the patterns and some of the common thinkers, some of the sources that you need to use in your own work. But it also will help you to see some of those purpose statements. But the other thing is that, and John Yeager will probably mention this in his session, but the other part of that is you want to make sure that your study is not already done. You don't want to get halfway through a study and say, oh my gosh, look what I just found, a dissertation that does exactly what I wanted to do. And so that's why that's important as well. And so the more you can do that, understanding, by the way, the different organizations, different institutions have different standards and different approaches to dissertations. You've got different ways that people do things. So you will need to follow the guidelines and the expectations for Johnson University in our process. But there's a lot that can be learned just by doing a simple, getting on ProQuest, getting on the database for dissertations, and use a keyword search and go through and look to see what's been done already. The other thing that would be good for that, by the way, that I would add to that is when you go through and look at those dissertations, some key elements you can look at. The purpose statement is important. Research questions are important. Methodology is important. And then go look at the need for future research section, because you might find in that section an element that might be just right up your alley as far as how to approach that. So, so keep that in mind as well.
That's actually where I got my dissertation topic, was need for future research. Somebody said somebody ought to go study this, and I thought that's a great idea. So it's a good place to look.
Well, let me open the floor then to anyone else, student or otherwise, who have any other thoughts, or if you have a question rolling around your head, how can we help you? Or if you're a student that have gone through this or is going through this, what are some tips you can share with your fellow students?
I have another question. So I'm in the methodology section of my proposal and part of that elective. And one of the things when it comes to citing sources is I have looked at a lot of dissertations, and there's certain pieces that you'll see in Creswell, and you'll see it in Merriam, and you'll see it in those. If you look at somebody's particular dissertation, it has some of the same common words. I'm so used to when I see something that has the same phrases, citing everything, but it's at the same time, it's like if it's in somebody else's dissertation, I'm a little bit leery of how much credit I give to other dissertations, or if I just go to Creswell, because they're all the same. They all have those same key terms. And I just want to make sure I do the right thing when it comes to that.
I would say that whenever there is an original thought within a dissertation that they build off of someone else, then that would be when you would want to cite that dissertation. But it's always better to go directly to the original source. So for example, I've mentioned this in other venues in the past, but if you're looking at a paper and they quote somebody in that paper and cite it, you could do technically by APA, you could say, Beard said, here's the quote, as cited in Crumpton 2020, or you could just go directly to Beard in his original work and cite that directly. That's always the preferable thing to do. So if it's just a thought that they're sharing within a dissertation of somebody else, always go back to the original. But for me, like for example, again, if there was some kind of unique connection that I made in my dissertation that was not dependent on that, even though I used different sources for that, the new connection is something you would cite me for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this one was just a little bit different than the literature review. And I was like, okay, I'm running into the same terms in everybody's dissertations and in everybody's books. And I was like, do I cite them all? Do I just pick and choose, kind of one of those things. So.
Yeah, I think maybe for clarification. So, the term andragogy is in my field is contributed to nulls, but you'll see andragogy in a lot of works. In my work even, but I didn't come up with it. Knowles did, so I would go back and cite Knowles for that.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Beard, I have a suggestion when it comes to searching databases, including ProQuest, Dissertation Digital, online. Besides keyword, and this is a librarian trick that took me 3 years to learn at library school, and that is subject headings. Subject headings are what librarians use to organize all that knowledge within databases, whether it's the ProQuest digital dissertations or EBSCO or JSTOR. Subject headings, it's a common, I don't want to say vocabulary, but it's common words that have been agreed upon by librarians, especially Library of Congress subject librarians in Washington, D.C., that will help to organize and to access whatever you're looking for. I stumbled upon a couple of those for my candidacy paper within ProQuest, some of those subject headings. Go to advanced search. There's almost always a button on that basic simple search page of a database, including ProQuest. Go to advanced search and look for subject heading. And you can even look up subjects in most of those databases.
Very good. That's the good stuff that we like from fellow students. So thank you, David, for sharing that. That's good. I do want to read, let me just ask by a show of hands, how many of you have already completed candidacy phase and you're working forward from there? Raise your hand if you're already past candidacy. 1, 2, okay. So most of you have not yet done candidacy, is that correct? Okay, those of you that have not finished candidacy, raise your hand if you have no idea what your topic is yet. Okay. Okay, yeah, and that's okay, that's okay. Now, I just want to reiterate in this, and we'll talk about, again, I'll talk more about this in the next session regarding candidacy, but use your candidacy topic as that exploration, as that idea of narrowing down. It's one of those things, and I will tell you just from my own experience, when it was candidacy time, I had no idea what I wanted to do my dissertation over. I was still not clear about what that was going to look like. I knew kind of the general area that I wanted to focus on, and so I chose a topic for my candidacy paper based on that. And for me, fortunately, my candidacy led to my dissertation focus. And so, in fact, I was able to copy and paste my candidacy paper into my research proposal, and I had a bulk of my research proposal done because of that. And so that was a blessing for me. But that isn't always the way it happens either. As I mentioned earlier, really, I would love to see one of two outcomes for you from your candidacy paper, other than the fact of you passing the candidacy process. That's obviously number one. But the way I see it is, for every one of these papers you want to use for more than one purpose. You want to multitask. And in this case, it's choosing a topic, and when you get done with the candidacy process, you'll either say, A, yes, I love this topic and I'm going to focus on this more and I want to pursue it in a more specific way, or B, no, I don't want to do this topic, I want to go in a different direction. And either one of those issues, or either one of those outcomes, to me is a success. It's something that's a very good blessing, because that will allow you then to focus moving forward. So most people do go in with that mindset, but that's just something to keep in mind, that both of those outcomes are success, because it does help clarify, regardless of whether you actually use it in your research proposal or dissertation later on. It does help with that process. Let me throw this question out here. What has been your biggest struggle with choosing a topic for whatever purpose?
Dr. Beard, I think my biggest problem is all the rabbits running in my head and continually erasing and having to go back to see what the question actually was that I'm answering. And I think becoming more intentional about paying attention and going back to what I'm supposed to be answering, rather than going off on all kind of things.
Yes, as mentioned before, that's so common, because there are so many, there's so much literature. There's very few topics out there where you're not going to have more literature than what you actually need, or more focuses than you actually need. So yeah, that is a tough thing. Have you found a good way to avoid chasing rabbits yet, or are you just still, are you still running around chasing rabbits at this point?
I'm not writing as much chasing rabbits as I was, simply because I've had to survive. I was overwhelmed, you know, and I was writing all these, you asked for 500 words and I'm writing 1,000. So I really had to focus in. And so it's just discipline.
Anybody else have tips on how to not chase rabbits in your research, in your writing? It is one of those common things you just have to find a way to overcome, I think. Another issue that I found was a struggle as well, whenever you're choosing a topic for your dissertation, is it's one thing to choose a topic, it's another thing to choose the framework and the methodology. And I think those things are difficult as well. I went round and round and round and round with Alicia about how to do my research, or what I should actually do, or what my theoretical framework was going to be. And I went from, I want to do a quantitative to a qualitative to a theoretical to whatever. And I think at one point she just said, you just got to figure it out, dude. You just got to do it. And, you know, in fact, at one point she said, if that's what you want to do, I don't know why you're in this program. You know, she said it very nicely, of course, but, you know, it was kind of like, you're going all over the place, and just, you know, think about it from this perspective, and you got to work through it. And so for me, it was a matter of trying to figure out how I wanted to frame the study of spiritual formation. And that was a very difficult thing, because I knew spiritual formation was my topic. I knew that that was where I really wanted to focus, but I had no idea how to frame it. And the key is, okay, what's the framework you're going to compare it to? Whenever you're working on your research proposal, that literature review is so key, because when you get done with your research, you have to come back and do analysis. And so what are you going to use to compare and contrast? And that is so vital. And so I don't remember what the process was. It was about a 5 or 6 week floundering for me. And even though we're recording this, I will go ahead and say exactly what I thought. I remember emailing Alicia and Dr. Weidman, Mark Weidman, and a couple of others that I was working with. And I think the subject line of my email was my oh crap moment, or my holy crap moment. And what happened, I literally woke up in the middle of the night. It was 2:45 or something like that. And all of a sudden I go, this is it, adult learning theory, compare and contrast, all this other stuff. And all of a sudden it hit me, and I sent them an email, and they were like, you're good to go, let's do it. So you'll have to struggle through that at times. And there's, you know, again, the more you can read other examples, I think the more ideas you can get. But sometimes it is a struggle to find out what's that theoretical framework, what's the way I want to frame my study on this specific topic. So any other insight from those of you that have done that or figured that out already? How'd you get me through that, Alicia? That's the real question.
I think you just got to continually push yourself to chunk. And honestly, the research purpose sort of template and approaching that as a template will help you chunk. So the verb points you to a sort of a class of methodologies, and then every element of the purpose statement is a chunk that should be addressed in your chapter 2 lit review. So the sooner you sort of get that sort of framework in your mind, I think the more you can start sort of seeing the chunks that you'll need to do research on. And then as a coach, what I continually do is I try to do, I should say, is just to keep asking questions, particularly around the purpose. If it isn't clear, if I can't really figure out what it is you're doing, you might hear me say something like, what is your real unit of analysis here? Are you interested in the individual? Are you interested in the organization? Are you interested in society? Sort of using our leadership conceptual framework to sort of get you to do the internal questioning and dialogue. And let's be real here. I think that that sometimes what I've seen in students is that they think they should, quote, already know it. That somehow that this should be an easy, oh, I should just see this readily. Writing a clear, succinct purpose statement, chunking it, and then applying or selecting the appropriate methodology is research, it's thinking. This is a very complex task. So give yourself permission to start, do some stuff, come back, revise, do some stuff, come back, revise. And I think that's what I remember with Chris is that it was the process of giving himself permission to see it as a process that requires a lot of thinking and back and forth and internal dialogue, as well as dialogue between him and me, I don't know, whichever way is proper to say that.
And I think along with that, it's acknowledging that the process is not linear, that it's not, very rarely are you ever going to have, okay, I did this, now it's time for this. So then it's C, D, E, F, even though there's a step that you have to go through in this process that is somewhat linear, the actual work is not as much. I see we've got Kim and Loretta in here who are currently in the research elective phase. And I've had conversations with them and others where right now they're in elective 5, which means that they've gone through, this is their 4th independent study, which they're focusing on their work. That means they've done some theoretical framework issue work. They've done some literature review work. In fact, most of everybody in that cohort has gotten most of their literature review done as far as their electives are concerned. But I've had a couple that I've talked to who are now working on their methodology, and they say, you know, I really want to study this from this approach. I want to focus on this. I want to look at it this way. And I'll say to them, okay, that's awesome. That's great that you have that vision. You're going to have to go back and revise your literature review, and you're going to have to add some material and take some material out. And that's okay, you know, because it is that revisiting and going back and forth, and almost like this hermeneutic circle where you're going, you know, you're revisiting it, you're coming back, you're going back, you're working, and it's just this back and forth until you get to that point where you're at a comfortable place. And so that's okay, and that's necessary. Very rarely, in fact, I will say, again, I always go back to my own experience, so forgive me for talking about that so much, but I think that's how I relate to your experience as well. I completely changed an elective. I was with Will in my elective process, and I was going to approach spiritual formation from the adult learning theory and practical theology standpoint. And all of a sudden I realized I don't need to do 2 dissertations. Even though Alicia had told me that 17 times before that, I thought I was still on the right track. And I actually said, okay, I'm going to drop this practical theology element. It's a great aspect of this, but I don't need it. And so I went and I focused more so on the adult learning theory. And that was, I think, probably elective 2 or 3 for me that I did that. And Will help me navigate that as well. So that's an important thing to remember, that it's not a linear thing. You're not going to it's not going to build up smoothly from one thing to another. It's going to require some revisiting.
I like to hear these stories, and it's nice to have a cohort, because I've had lots of conversations with Dr. Beard and Dr. Crumpton, and I was in that same boat that Dr. Beard was, along with some of our other members of the cohort. And it's nice to have that sounding board, but also to just know that you're going through some of the same experiences. Like, I always think of it like popcorn. You know, we're all under the same pressure and the heat, but we all pop at different times. Not all the kernels pop right away. And it's like pop, pop, pop. And I know his happened later or earlier in the elective process. And I was like 2 electives before I had my aha moment. And it was only through talking to him and getting on the same page that I started being able to verbalize what I was thinking. And just having that sounding board, my dad's been that too. It's like, I'm sitting there talking about it, and I know if I can't explain it to him, then I need to keep going back and thinking about it. But then once I start to be able to explain it and get passionate about it, then I can kind of have those moments of like, oh, I figured it out. You know, I mean, it's just, sometimes you don't even realize until you start seeing what other people have gone through and talking about it and answering those questions like Dr. Crumpton said. So I like the aha moments.
The PhD is a lot of work. There's no other way to say that. It's an immense amount of work. I believe it challenges us practically on every plane of our living, emotionally, socially, financially, intellectually. It truly is the thing that you become from my perspective. The theme of our retreat this year is grace. I know John said it was an unofficial theme, but what a beautiful word that is. And what a beautiful gift to give yourselves. When you don't know something, please don't flounder. Call somebody. Ask, just ask the question. No one will think you're stupid. No one will think you don't belong here. Everyone's going to remember that we have the same questions. We have the same fear. I noticed that there's several of us today that are before candidacy, so you're working that direction. You're soon to step on a pace that goes nearly vertical. The learning curve accelerates from this point. And I think one of the things that makes it feel like it's accelerating is that your sheer ignorance becomes visible to you. That's not a bad thing. It's why you're here. And it's why we're here to walk alongside you and point the way, give you the pointers, the tips, the help, that you can embrace these new thoughts. There's new words, vocabulary. The notion of a conceptual frame, we were sharing some thoughts last night in the mixer about this, that so many of us struggle with the idea of what is a conceptual frame. And it feels like you're being asked, this is just one point, feels like you're being asked to see the beginning from the end so you can create a roadmap of how you're going to go from where you are now to the day that you receive your diploma. And there is some reality to that. But the truth is you can't. So much of what you're doing here is, I think Dr. Beard alluded to this, is that it's an unmasking. It's a spiral that you're here now and you can see what's in front of you. And as you turn the corner, you'll see something new. But you're always on a corner in this work, always. You never get a 50-mile stretch of road where you can say, now I got it. No, you just don't. At least in my experience, it was probably, I don't know how many, it was several years after I graduated that what I went through started to make sense to me. And the pieces started falling into place as to why they had me do the things that I had to do. If you find yourself in that spot, welcome to the club. Nobody's going to look down on you. We want you to try. We want you to make effort. We have to see effort. We want to see engagement and thoughtful work and engagement. But we fully expect to see ignorance too. We've been there. And I think it's kind of humbled all of us that we just don't know as much anymore. I used to say, and I meant this, I mean it sincerely. I used to know a lot. Look, I've been to, like you, I've been to there and got the degrees and the training and, oh goodness. I've been around the horn on a few things. I used to know a lot, but today I just don't know so much. And I'm very happy saying that. It's okay. It's just okay. From my experience, my journey in a PhD has taught me humility. And I hope I never forget it, that I just don't know. But I've been trained to research, so I can go find out what I don't know.
Well, and I think that one of the most the most burden lifting elements of my PhD experience was discovering the concept of imposter syndrome. And that's what Will is referring to. I didn't know about that until I was in the middle of the PhD program, and I read an article about it, and it said that, you know, it's a syndrome in which people who are capable of doing successful things think that they are imposters and that everybody around them is smarter than they are and that they don't belong where they are. And I felt that way as a PhD student. Even now, I'm afraid that Dr. Brim or Dr. Weatherly or Dr. Smith is going to storm into this Zoom meeting, SWAT team style, and say, we made a horrible mistake. Dr. Beard does not deserve to be a doctor nor to be director. And so we're gonna have to start all over. I wonder that if that's gonna happen on a daily basis. So that doesn't go away. But I guess the good news is that we are all in this together. So know that you do belong, and that, and I'll say this too. We always joked previously, one of the former students, or one of our current students who's worked, actually same student I talked about earlier, Aaron Montz, once told Alicia and I that she was the compassionate one and I was the protector of the rigor for the program. That, you know, I wanted to make sure that we were rigorous because, you know, I have the PhD from the program. I want to make sure that it's worth something. So if we lower our standards, then it's going to hurt me personally. And there's some truth to that. And I hope that you see that as protecting you as well as in your experience. But the point of that being is that, as Will said, getting a PhD is difficult, and you are here for a reason. You are in this program for a reason, and that reason is because you deserve to be, and you're able to accomplish what you're able to accomplish. The other thing that I would really echo too, and say that we have a wonderful, diverse faculty. We have the affiliate faculty design is brilliant. And I am very comfortable saying that in the presence of the founder of the program. That is one of the strongest aspects of this program, is that we have professors from literally all over the country with all sorts of backgrounds in research and life experience and leadership experience and perspectives. And I would really encourage you, if you get to that place where you're stuck, then certainly call whoever your coach is at the time. So the other great part of this program is that you're never alone in this process. You have a professor, you have a director that's advising you throughout. When you get to the electives phase, you'll have an electives coach. When you get to the dissertation phase or research proposal phase, you'll have a committee and a chairperson. You're never alone. And absolutely, positively, be in touch with your professor, your coach, your chair, whoever it might be. But reach out to others as well, because I can promise you that my perspective is different than Will's perspective or Jackie's perspective. And that doesn't mean that I'm right and they're wrong or vice versa. It means that we see things from a different angle. And that is such a blessing when it comes to developing your topic and your research, because you'll be able to see things a little differently or get a little bit different perspective. And I don't know any professor in this program who is not willing to take a phone call and just let you talk, as Kim said, to talk it out. And that's been one of my favorite things to do in this process, is have a student call and say, can I just talk to you about some ideas? And then my brain starts to work and we go back and forth. And so I really do encourage you to do that, and not just limit your interaction to one person, but reach out to others as well, because you'll find that there's a lot of advantage to speaking to different minds in that thinking. So thank you, Will, for sharing that. That was beautifully put, that we all feel like we're idiots, but we only are in the fact that we're ignorant, right? Any other questions or input from you as students? Okay, I'll tell you what we'll do then. It is noon Central, and so, extrapolate that out to wherever you are. Our next session is going to be at 2:30 Eastern. So it approximately, let's see, wait, am I confused here? Yeah, 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central.
Yep, basically an hour and a half from now.
An hour and a half from now. Okay, thank you, John, for doing the math for me. Math was not my strong suit. That's why I didn't do quantitative with Wilbur. We got about an hour and a half, and I will stick around a little bit here if you have any questions personally, I can answer to that. We'll stop the recording here in a moment, and then that way we can have a conversation if need be. Others, professors, if you want to stick around as well, that's fine too. But go get some lunch, go take a break, and then come back if you're here for the next session or whatever the session you'll be here for. But thank you for being here at this point. I hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you again later. So thanks.